Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan Extreme Heat and Impact on Seniors and Youth event. Sponsored by the City of Long Beach, the Citizens Climate Lobby, Long Beach 350, and Councilmember Roberto Uranga. Yay! I am Myron Wolin. I am the president of the Long Beach Gray Panthers. We are a sponsor, again, of this event. The Gray Panthers is a group that's fighting for senior rights and senior protection. We are interested in issues that affect seniors, health care for all and quality health issues, economic rights for elders, housing, human rights, immigration reform, LGBTQ issues, livable communities. We are concerned about ageism, and our founder, Maggie Kuhn, 40 years ago, and by the way, this is our 45th anniversary. There are 6 myths about old age: that it's a disease, it's a disaster, that we are mindless, that we are sexless, that we are useless, and that we are powerless. And we're here to change those conceptions about elders and fighting for their rights. Welcome to the talk about climate change and extreme heat. In today's LA Times, there was an article about climate action throughout the world. Greta, a 16-year-old teenager, addressed 25,000 people in Berlin that had a rally yesterday regarding climate change. Near the Brandenburg Gate, there were supposedly 879 rallies throughout the world. 279 of them were supposed to be in the United States. This is in today's LA Times. So climate change is becoming more and more on people's minds, and there's more and more action around it. So this is another example of that interest in climate change, and we are happy to host this event. Just a couple of housekeeping things. That you were given comment cards along with raffle tickets. Those comment cards will be used to write your comments for the panel discussion that's later on going on. As far as the program for today's event, you may or may not have gotten a copy of it, but from 10:30 to 10:45, Roberto Uranga and Allison Spindler will be speaking. There will be an overview of the Climate Action Adaptation Plan by Allison Spindler. There will be climate change impacts on older adults and youth. Jake Heflin, Dean Toji, Dr. Jennifer Lawrence, from 11:05 to 11:50. From 11:50 to 12 o'clock, there'll be a first raffle prize drawing. 12 to 12:30 will be lunch, sponsored by Councilmember Uranga. 12 to 12:40 during lunch, there'll be a panel discussion, Solution for Older Adults, with Karen Raside from the Gray Panthers, Jake Heflin, Citizens Climate Lobby, Edric Guys, and Dr. Dean Toji and Dr. Lenz from Long Beach 350. From 12:45 to 1 p.m., there'll be table visits, the various tables that are around the room from our participating organizations. And from 1 to 1:30, we will be finishing and cleanup. So that's our program. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Councilmember Uranga. Councilmember Uranga is from the 7th Council District. He's a member of the Coastal Commission, and he's a supporter of the Gray Panthers. Councilmember Uranga.
Thank you. Excuse me if I had that little shout out, but like, if I don't shout out for myself, who will, right? Welcome to the 7th District and welcome here. One of the things that I always like to ensure or commend people who participate in these kinds of events is the fact that you're exercising your civic engagement and your right to express yourself and to share your ideas. Because that's what it's always all about. It's about sharing ideas and being able to share our concerns as well. We know that climate change is real. We know that it exists. While we might have some naysayers out there, all you have to do is step outside and breathe the air, and you know that it's a reality. Been talking to some people this morning. My eyes are watery. My nasal is plugged because I'm suffering a little bit from allergies. And this is going to be a particularly dangerous allergy season because of all the rains that we've gotten. We know that if you go down, if you've heard the news, what's going on in Elsinore with all the poppies blooming and how beautiful it is, but with the beauty comes the danger. So just keep that in mind. And I know there's going to be a lot of great topics discussed today. I was at a conference yesterday called WELL. It's water education for Latino leaders. And you don't have to be Latino to be a part of that organization, but it's basically trying to get people involved and learn more about what's going on with our water resources. And we know that there's some shortages out there. We know that there's great impacts that are going to be happening with the water. And so they're talking about what we can do to not only preserve our water, but to get more of it. And to not only use it for what we need to have it for sustenance and support, but how we can reuse it as well. Talking about stormwater capture, recycling, and just being more frugal in how we use our water resources. Not much was talked about gray water, but gray water also is something that we should be looking into in terms of when we take our showers or wash our dishes and what we could do with that gray water and get back into the system so that we try to preserve and reuse as much water as we possibly can. As a member of the Coastal Commission, sea level rise is a big issue in the coast. There's 1,100 miles of coast up and down California, and there's a lot of access that we want to preserve. There's a lot of habitat that we want to keep. There's a lot of access that we want to have people to go to the beach and enjoy the beaches. So when we're looking at projects and developments that might be going up and down the coast, we always keep in mind that sea level rise is going to be a major impact in all those projects, and you have to plan for it. There's also some projects out there that we can't approve, like for example, armoring of the coast, no walls. I mean, let nature take its course. Because what happens when you put up a wall to protect a house along the beach, you create other issues where that water might be redirected into another area that creates other issues and other problems. So armoring is frowned upon, but at the same time, we want to also preserve what we got in our beaches. So it's important topics. It's an important issue. There's a lot of different aspects of climate change that we need to look at, and we're going to study and learn about those here today, hopefully. And I want to thank you for being here and for your civic engagement. And if there's any way that you want to share with me personally, or you'd like to talk about more issues along this line, feel free to contact my office. And it's very easy to call me. It's 562-570-JACKPOT. 7777. You line up those sevens and you hit the jackpot when you call my office. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Next, I would like to introduce my good friend, Allison Spindler, who is the planner for the Development Services City of Long Beach, and she'll be talking about the overview of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. Allison.
Thanks, Thanks, Myron, and thanks, Councilmember Uranga, for that great introduction. So I'm excited to be here with you all this morning to talk about the really important issue of extreme heat. We thought it was critical to have this conversation, knowing that extreme heat is the climate stressor that's projected to have the largest health impact to all of our Long Beach residents in the city. And as you already heard from the speakers this morning, this is not a future problem, it's a present problem, and something we really need to address. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of what we're doing to develop the city's first ever climate action and adaptation plan, and give you kind of a high-level overview of some of the data that we're finding and some of the actions we're considering for the plan. We've got Fiona and Jennifer at the back at our table, so after or in between sessions, if you have any comments or want to see the list of all 200 actions we're thinking about, please come by. We want to hear your feedback. And with that, I'll get us started. So, at the city, we are working to develop this CAP. I want to make sure we start with what is climate action. So climate action is about reducing the impact that we as people have on the future of our planet by reducing future greenhouse gas emissions. On the other hand, climate adaptation is recognizing that climate change is already here. UCLA did a meta-study about LA County that found that 97% of science agrees not only is it already here, but it's already impacting our health in Los Angeles County. And so adaptation is about how do we change our behaviors or our systems or the way we do business to adapt to make sure we stay safe and healthy in the face of climate change. So then what is the CAP? The CAP will be a plan to reduce our future greenhouse gas emissions, prepare the community for the impacts of climate change, all while using it as an opportunity to help create a healthier and more prosperous city. We know we already have environmental health issues even without climate change, and that this could be an opportunity to address some of those. This slide just shows you that this is not the city's first attempt at addressing sustainability and climate issues. The port created its first green port policy or plan, their Clean Air Action Plan in 2006. We have a sustainability office, a sustainable city commission, but what's notable here is that our mayor committed to the Global Covenant of Mayors back in 2015 that said, hey, we are recognizing how big climate change is of an issue for us and for cities across the world, and we're gonna do our part. And that was part of what committed us to doing this CAP. Okay, so there's a whole host of reasons to do a CAP. Of course, we care about sustainability, and we want to make sure we keep people safe and healthy, but there's actually a whole host of state laws that really compel us to do this and are helping us meet those obligations to the state. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of outreach. This is one of our pride points for this project is that we've been out there talking to community members, talking to the public, as well as to experts in the field. We have a scientific working group to make sure that the information and data and science that we're basing this on is accurate and correct, and we actually have Dr. Toji, who will be speaking later today, part of our scientific working group. The aquarium is part of it as well, making sure we have that data and science to work on. We've also been out there working with businesses, community members, also talking to other city departments. I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that not every city department always talks to each other, so it's important that we talk to each other in this plan to make sure it's a citywide plan, not just a plan that sits on a shelf for planning. Here are some pictures and highlights from the community engagement we've been out doing since last June. We've had over 20 events. We've reached over 8,000 people. Back in January, we had a specific talk about sea level rise and what residents can do to prepare. And again, here we're doing that same thing for extreme heat. Events large and small, going to community existing festivals. Here are the main climate stressors impacting Long Beach according to the science. You've got sea level rise, drought, flooding, extreme heat, and air quality issues. Here are the different types of parts of our community impacted by climate change, starting with our health, as well as housing and neighborhoods, our transportation and infrastructure in the city, as well as things like water, wastewater, that type of infrastructure as well. I'm going to start with extreme heat because, again, that's what we're here for today, and it impacts the largest number of residents in our city. The data shows that historically, between 1980 and 2000, in Long Beach, we would have about 4 extreme heat days a year. That's over 95 degrees in a day. By 2050, we're looking at somewhere between 11 and 16 extreme heat days a year, and by 2100, up to 37 extreme heat days per year. Another thing about climate change is that the cooling effect at night is going to lessen. So as right now, when it cools down at night, that helps us sort of get some relief. That will be going away. On the right side of the slide, you can see some of the impacts of extreme heat. They have serious health impacts. You're going to hear more about that today, but it includes heat-related illness, injury, or death. It can also cause issues in terms of vector-borne diseases, parasites, a whole host of things. And it can also lead to missed work days, missed school days. It can impact transportation infrastructure, making it hard to get to and from school or work, or keeping businesses open. And again, this is a present problem, not a future problem. This slide here was actually created by Dr. Lenz, who you'll also hear from today, who looked at the science and said, hey, we are not at 4 extreme heat days a year. We're actually already in the past 10 years seeing more. Can anyone see which year we had the largest number of extreme heat days in the last decade? 2015. And in 2015, summer 2015, we had a very serious set of power outages, as many of you may recall, and it was during this extreme heat wave. And so that's where you can see how the change in the weather and climate can impact our infrastructure. So imagine a whole week, and you'll hear more about this today, but a whole week without power for older adults living in high rises who may not be able to get up and down the elevators, who may not be able to keep their medication or food refrigerated. What do we do to make sure that we stay safe and healthy in the face of these climate change issues? Here are some of the actions we're considering. Oh, sorry, this is the map of where extreme heat is projected to be the worst in the city. There's a very large version of the map on the wall as well. You can see that central, west, and north Long Beach. And that's a combination of geographic factors as well as the urban heat island effect. And I'm sure we'll get more into that today. And then here is a list of some of the draft actions we're considering. Everything from adding more shade structures to parks and bus stops, as well as expanding access to cooling centers, expanding the hours of cooling centers, having more public water supply access, and also changing the way we build things, so using cool pavement, cool roofs, green roofs, those kind of things. These are just examples. We have more on our list. I also wanted to point out the social vulnerability to climate change map. You can see it's actually very similar to the extreme heat map. Some communities are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. For example, those with limited income may not have the money to go stay at a hotel, or those that walk or bike because they don't have a car, don't have as many options to stay cool on their way to work or school. And so understanding those social vulnerabilities to climate change on top of the extreme heat itself makes you recognize how serious of an issue we have here. I'm going to move next to flooding. There's actually 3 different ways that flooding happens in the city of Long Beach. We have more extreme storms and weather events due to climate change. We also have what's called urban flooding issues, so when the storm drain system doesn't work quite right, and then of course sea level rise. You can see here the aquarium projects about 22,000 residents to be impacted by sea level rise by 2050. And flooding, again, it's not just sea level rise. I know that areas right around this park were impacted by flooding 2 summers ago, and 2 winters ago, we had some really bad rain events that led to flooding in the streets. And so that can create injury or displacement, as well as flooded roads, making it hard to get to and from, as well as getting our police and fire services to where they need to go. Here is where we have riverine flooding projections. So the rivers overtopping both the Long Beach and San Gabriel rivers. The blue is a 1% chance storm, and the orange is a 500-year storm event. You may have heard in the New York Times or the LA Times recently about the really large storm event they modeled. Well, these are much more likely potential storms that could impact big parts of our city. And then I'm going to show you some sea level rise projections. These are for 2030, where in dark blue, we would have flooding from what's called a king tide, which happens a couple times a year when we have large winter tides. And then the light blue is a 1% storm chance on top of it. Here's on the east side of the city, the kind of flooding that we would have. Here's for 2050. You can see the flooding is growing, both on the east and west side of Long Beach. This is for 2100 mid-range. You can see a large chunk of our coastal areas are projected to be impacted if we do not adapt. That's why we're developing a plan. And this is actually the first scenario where we would have widespread daily high tide flooding, so flooding every day. Here are some of the city buildings impacted by that flooding, so you can imagine the fiscal impact and the challenge for the city, how to make sure we can continue to maintain our services. Here are some of the actions we're considering around flooding, everything from flood event notification to doing things like berms or elevating critical roadways or infrastructure to make sure that we can continue to provide services as a city. And then this slide shows you we're considering many different greenhouse gas reduction targets, but the point on the slide here is that no matter which one we select, it's got to go way down from where we are today. I'm not going to focus too much on that today. Here just kind of tells you where most of our greenhouse gases come from. Over half of them come from transportation, so how we get around, how the stuff that we buy gets around, and then about 40% from the buildings, turning on the lights, the heats, the air conditioning, and then the rest from waste. Here are some sample actions we're considering on the transportation side, having better bus service, also doing shade structures at bus stops so it's more comfortable for people. You might remember that was also on the extreme heat list, so that's an example of what we call a co-benefit. There are certain actions that can actually help us both reduce our future greenhouse gases, but also adapt and be prepared and safe for climate change. Also looking at how do we get more people to be able to walk and bike when they can, so continuing to invest in bike and walk pedestrian infrastructure, looking at electric vehicle deployment, and a whole host of other strategies. So in terms of next steps, we're taking public comment now on the draft actions and continuing to prioritize those. We hope to have a draft plan by about May, and then move forward through the environmental review process and see the City Council around January of 2020 with the plan. Here is our website and our hashtag, a few ways to get involved. We also have the handouts again over at the table that have all that information. And we have our next citywide open house where we'll kind of show the draft plan and have a whole bunch of activities June 1st. At Marine Stadium. We're partnering with a bunch of high school students who are putting together a lot of the interactive activities and tables and kind of festival components where they are actually leading a lot of this work, so we hope you'll join us. It should be a lot of fun. And with that, I will turn it over to the panel.
Hello. So at this point, we will have a panel, Climate Change Impacts on Older Adults and Youth. Jake Heflin from the Citizens Emergency Response Team. Jake? Good. And Dr. Dean Toji from Citizens Climate Lobby, and Jennifer Lentz from the Citizens Climate Lobby.
From the Aquarium of the Pacific.
Pardon me, Aquarium of the Pacific. That's not on my... And
We also have a representative from the Long Beach Health Department, a nurse from the nurses unit, and Nancy, could you remind me your last name again? Nancy Rihanna. So, one moment.
okay. So according to my schedule here, you will each have 15 minutes. And Dean Toji?
He's coming.
Dean.
He's coming.
He's coming. Well, why don't we start out? Start out with Jennifer. She happens to be the first one here. No. No.
All right, how's everyone doing today?
Yeah, good.
Excellent. So, if I can actually see. If I step down to the ground, will people still be able to see me all right? Excellent. Will just help me to know which slide is up. So today I'm going to start by showing you some of the impacts for climate change most importantly in Long Beach, and then later on when we do the panel this afternoon, I'll focus on some of the more positive aspects of putting this all into context. So as we heard in Allison's talk this morning, the main impacts for climate change or Long Beach are going to be extreme heat, worsening air quality, drought and water scarcity, and sea level rise, coastal flooding, as long as inland flooding. And then the nexus of all of this is going to be how it impacts public health and social vulnerability. And all of these are really tightly connected to each other. So just looking at Long Beach alone in terms of extreme heat, in July 6th of 2018, the LA area broke extreme heat records region-wide. Chino had 120 degrees that day. At the Long Beach airport, we hit 109 degrees Fahrenheit. When I moved here 6 years ago, I was told you don't need air conditioning in Long Beach because it never really gets above 70 degrees. It was 109 in July. And you can see that all of these areas broke region records. Now this is the summer. We're also having hotter winters. So earlier that year in January of 2018, it was 91 degrees in January at the Long Beach airport. We don't think about that. I mean, it's been a colder winter this year, but moving forward, we're gonna start to see more and more of this, and it has large impacts across the board for both Long Beach and additional areas. Now, Allison showed a version of this. I actually updated it last night. So this is as of yesterday, but I didn't include 2019 because we don't have that much data for that yet, but it includes all of 2018. I recently had a chance to talk to one of the authors of Sun et al., Alex Hall, and throughout the talk, throughout his paper, they talk about extreme heat being greater than 95 degrees Fahrenheit. But when I talked to him, I said, just out of curiosity, is that really legitimately greater than 95 degrees, or is it greater than or equal to? So if I have temperatures that are 95.0, is that included in your estimates? And he said, oh, absolutely. So I redid the graph. And if you include greater than or equal to, we've passed the best case scenarios for 2050 in terms of extreme heat days. So we're already experiencing the best case scenarios for number of extreme heat days per year now, which means we need to do something about this now. It's not thinking about it in the future. We're experiencing this now. So 2015, that year that we lost power for several weeks, we had 13 extreme heat days, which were days greater than 95 degrees, greater than or equal to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Best case scenario for 2050, if we really reduce our carbon emissions, we'd have 11. So we're there. And we know that just by our experience in Long Beach. So in 2017, we had quite a few extreme heat days. Schools shut down due to triple-digit heat. Many of Long Beach schools don't have air conditioning, so we had to pull kids out of schools, which also means parents are missing work because their kids are home. Thanksgiving of that year, we shattered heat records for Southern California. It was in the upper 90s. I think it passed 100 in some areas for Thanksgiving week. That's unheard of. And the key is all of these impacts are related to each other. So extreme heat also plays a key role in the impacts of air quality. So as our heat goes up, that actually worsens our air quality, and it worsens the impacts of pollution on air quality. So Long Beach and the LA area, even though California has some of the best environmental regulations, we're among the worst cities for air quality according to the American Lung Association. And as our heat goes up, it increases smog. It makes all of these health impacts much, much worse. So anybody that lives along the 710 corridor knows that it's much harder to breathe along the 710 corridor. Whenever I drive it, I'm using recycled air in my car just because I start to feel it as I'm on the 710. Region-wide, if you look at diesel emissions for the entire state of California, all of this white is very low diesel emissions. This dark blue is where we have diesel emissions higher than 90% of the rest of the state. And if you look at the city of Long Beach, 73% of Long Beach has diesel particulate matter emissions higher than 90% of California. And right along the coast, those red areas have the highest diesel emissions in the state. So we're breathing this in every day, and that is region-wide throughout the city. All those yellow dots are public schools. So that gives you an idea of how big of an impact this is. Now, As heat increases, we're seeing a variety of impacts. So as our heat increases, it completely changes our climate. Increasing heat pulls water out of the ocean and causes more extreme weather events. So we're starting to experience more and more atmospheric rivers, which are what are causing these extreme rain events that we've started to experience lately. And the atmospheric rivers lead to intense flooding. So just last week, we had hail in Long Beach. My dad lives in Texas. I'm used to hail in Texas. I went to school in upstate New York, never had hail. We had blizzards and snow, but we really didn't have hail. But hail in Long Beach, that's not normal, much less now. So we're getting these extreme weather events, but they're compounded by extreme droughts. So we also get extreme flooding events when we get these rain events. So in 2017, we had another atmospheric river, and this is a picture from Long Beach that shows citywide flooding. We had 3.87 inches drop in a very short amount of time, and that's not enough time for our ground to absorb this water. I don't know if you can tell, but this man is carrying a kayak oar. So that's part of how they were getting through certain areas of the city. But when we think about these extreme rain events, they have compounding impacts. So we're experiencing prolonged droughts, which means that a lot of our trees are used to long periods without water. Their root systems start to shrivel up, their trunks start to weaken, and then you get hit with these extreme rain events where suddenly they're inundated with all this water, they're soaking it up. When it comes time for the deciduous trees to canopy, they're actually over-canopying, and then you start seeing massive tree failures for otherwise healthy trees because the base of the tree physically can't hold the weight of their branches. So this picture on the right is my neighbor's tree. And you can see all of these seemingly healthy branches that fell just out of the blue. There wasn't wind. They fell solely because the trunk couldn't handle those branches. And we're seeing that with wind events and other things. So we need to be thinking about, while we need quite a few more trees, we also need to be putting in systems to maintain these trees, thin their canopies, and help them withstand these long droughts so that when we get these rain events, it's not compounding the problem. Based on 2010 census levels, so this number will change when the next census comes out, without any projected sea level rise, Long Beach, when we experience a 100-year storm, over 22,000 people will be at risk of flooding. And so this was January of 2017. This winter, we had the atmospheric river that was dumping tons and tons of water on Long Beach, and it coincided with our seasonal high tides. And so here in Belmont Shore, you can see quite a bit of flooding that was already happening there. So this is without sea level rise on top of it. And as Allison showed, we have quite a bit of projected sea level rise coming down the pike. Without any sea level rise, just with a 100-year storm, the breakwaters already get impacted, which creates additional stressors to our shoreline. But moving forward, we're expecting sea level rise region-wide. And that's something that may not impact all of Long Beach, but it is something that we need to be paying attention to. And there are local health impacts of all of this with regards to climate change. So if we look at those key stressors that I talked about, and we focus first on extreme heat. So extreme heat leads to heat cramps, exhaustion, heat stroke. The most vulnerable people to extreme heat are going to be children, elderly, athletes, homeless, low-income residents, residents without air conditioning, and anybody living in areas of high heat island effect with minimal trees. So trees really lessen the impact of extreme heat. Then if we think about our prolonged droughts, so prolonged droughts have already led to increased costs of food. They've already led to water rationing. There are cities throughout California that have already run out of fresh water. So this isn't a third world problem. California has cities that don't have drinkable water. So this is something that we need to be thinking about. Long Beach is one of the top cities in terms of regulating our water, so we're in the upper cusp of that, but this is very much a local, regional problem. With extreme drought, we also get food contamination and water contamination, as well as outbreaks of vector-borne diseases. So when you have these extreme droughts and then you have sitting water, you get more vector-borne diseases. The vulnerable are pretty much uniformly region-wide. It's going to be everybody is prone to vector-borne diseases. That doesn't really change based on where you live in Long Beach or your economic status. And Any areas close to green space or places with sitting water are going to be increasingly susceptible to this. Deteriorating air quality. We have worsening asthma and cancer rates region-wide across Long Beach, especially along the 710 corridor. Those most at risk are going to be the children, elderly, those living close to freeways and ports, and schools schools that are located near freeways. I remember when I first lived here, or when I first moved here 6 years ago, I lived in a rental in southern Long Beach, and I had window fans to try and keep my apartment cool. And there was this black layer of soot on all of my walls that was just the air coming in. I've never experienced that anywhere else I've lived. But that gives you an idea of just how bad our air quality is here. And then in terms of sea level rise and coastal flooding, as well as inland flooding, the risks of this are going to be drinkable water contamination, impaired water bodies, sewage outflows. I know every time we get an extreme rain, we're always being told to keep people out of the beach waters because we're having sewage problems, we're having high bacteria problems, it's not healthy to be in the water, so we're going to continue to see this. The people most impacted by sea level rise are going to be the coastal residents, but all populations of Long Beach are going to be impacted by contaminated drinking water, flooding. When we get these extreme rain events where our ground is so dry it physically can't absorb the water, you get homes flooding, and that leads to mold and a variety of problems that cause additional health impacts. So this was kind of the negatives of the impacts of climate change for Long Beach. Later on in the panel, we'll be talking about solutions, which will be more uplifting. But anybody that wants additional information, the aquarium published a report for the City of Long Beach advising them on recommendations to become more climate resilient. All of this information is available online. I've got this third trifold brochure that's kind of things everybody can do on the table and back, as well as our business card that will connect you to resources that you can download from home. And I will hand it over to the next speaker.
Yeah. Dean Toji from Long Beach, from Long Beach 350.
Good morning. I'm with Long Beach 350. It's a chapter of 350.org, which is an international organization, volunteers working on climate change from a social justice perspective. We've been working on the CAP for about a year now. We want to make sure that it's effective in terms of addressing the global warming side. We got to get to zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. And we want it to be effective in adapting to climate change, to deal with all of the impacts of the change. And we want it to be fair, so we prioritize the most vulnerable people and neighborhoods. Give you an idea of how we think about it. We look at emergency responses to heat waves, right? There's long-term things like planting trees and changing building envelopes, but there's what do you do when it happens? So one of the major ideas is to have cooling centers, right? Places where you can go to get out of a hot apartment. So I think you already know that heat waves are the deadliest, right? Europe, there was something like 70,000 died about a decade or so ago. A lot of people die at home, you know, and in their houses. In the United States, the biggest event was in Chicago. 600 or 700 people died, excess deaths during a 10-week heat wave. The most vulnerable people were elderly, poor, men living alone in apartments without air conditioning. So elderly, poor men living alone, no AC. In Chicago, the deaths were disproportionately poor black men. So there's a racial skew to expose to all of the problems that make it worse. And so what can we do about it with the cooling center? So thinking through the cooling center's ideas in Long Beach, I think we have the capacity for about 2,000 beds. Is that the right number? Yeah. And I think we're one of the better cities in terms of planning for it. So increase the capacity of the cooling centers. But the other thing is that even if they're there, how do you get there, right? People who don't have air-conditioned apartments, don't have cars, can't pay for taxis or Lyft or whatever, so you have to transport people back and forth, right? So to get them there, you need a way to get them there. You also have to have some trust. Okay, there's a heat wave and somebody in a uniform with a clipboard neighbor comes to the door, not speaking your language and says, hey, let's leave. You're gonna go out, you're not gonna answer the door, right? So you need trust relationships. So for example, you need to build up community groups to form relationships, to inform people, and who are trusted when it's time to get out of an apartment because of dangers. That could be community organizations, that could be churches, it could be Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, soccer leagues, whatever, but anything that strengthens the community and also carries the message about what you can do about climate change, and somebody who's trusted in a heat wave to say, it's better to get out of your apartment now would be something important. So build up the community structure. The other thing is that, what about security? Okay, it's hot, you leave, everybody's a heat wave, the city says here's places to go to be safe. So everybody knows that people will leave their apartments and go stay in a park or a community center. Bad guys know that. Right? Bad guys know that people aren't home. So you need to protect the apartments while people are out. You know, so there's all these steps that you need to do. The cooling center itself is necessary, but there's a whole thing about building up the community, building up community networks and trust, information, transportation, protection and security. All those things have to be done to make the cooling center work to save lives. Okay, so that would be what you would have to do to protect that poor elderly person living alone without air conditioning. So I think sometimes we hear about a solution and it sounds like a magic bullet. Do that and it's going to work. We have to think very broadly and think very holistically about how all the parts of our society work to affect the situation and the effectiveness. Doing it right means doing a lot of things right. So that's just one action measure, like a cooling center in a heat wave. So I'm really glad that Gray Panthers took the lead in working on this with a focus on seniors and heat waves. I'm a senior, so I'm glad they're doing it. But as you already know, there's a lot of other groups too, right, that are also vulnerable to heat waves. So infants, people with pre-existing health conditions, people who work outdoors, kids walking home after school when it's 100 degrees, anybody without a car, kids in the schools. I think Jennifer mentioned that we don't have 100% air conditioning here. Long Beach Unified is one of the few big city school systems that doesn't have 100%. Most of them do, we don't. My kid goes to Wilson and is scheduled to get air conditioning, I think in 2022, and his comment was, great, I'll be gone. And talk about how hot it is when you're trying to study. So we're working, Long Beach 350 is working on figuring out programs and policies to recommend to the city on its climate action plan. So we're working with community groups to try to develop solutions with people who know those sectors and neighborhoods the best. If I'm going to work on infants, well, I can sort of guess, but people who are parents of infants now, people who do that as a profession, they're the ones that we want to talk to figure out what are the specific things to help with infants and all the other groups. So that's our project right now, CAP recommendations. So the Long Beach 350 people want to raise your hands? Yeah, talk to them. So any group that you're working with, any community, any personal concern, talk, because you've got ideas and information that can really help us come up with good recommendations to offer to the city. That's my time. Do you have a little bit more time? Yeah. Okay, so thinking broadly than that, we're working on the Green New Deal. You probably heard about it. That's a national strategy to deal with climate change, right? Get greenhouse gas emissions down really fast as the climate scientists tell us. We got to move really fast in the next decade or so to be on the path to get it down to zero in 30 years or so. That's what climate science tells us we have to do. It's going to take a lot of work to do it. So you make it into a jobs program. We need it, that's the New Deal part. We need good jobs in this country, and it'll be targeted to people and places that need it. Right? We needed a New Deal even if there wasn't a climate problem. You know, right now there's a lot of jobs, but a lot of bad jobs and unstable jobs and underpaying jobs. So we need to fix that side too, and we need to fix the bias that leaves people out of it. So that's our local stuff is working on the CAP, and the larger national policy stuff is supporting the Green New Deal. So We'd be really interested in working with you, talking with you. You can join us or join us in a coalition, or just check us out. So we'd be really happy to see you. Thanks a lot.
Yes. I'm afraid I didn't catch your name. The nurse, Nancy.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Rion. I'm a nurse with the City of Long Beach Department of Health and Human Services, and I want to thank Allison for inviting me here to talk about heat illness, and my focus is on heat and vulnerable populations. I do have a, is that up? Okay, okay, so I can't see it, so hopefully, like, okay. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I tried that.
Yeah. I'm not young. I can't jump off the stage. So okay. 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 So I'm going to talk about heat illnesses. So the first thing is thermal regulation. So our body is a wonderful, like a wonderful machine. It basically has these mechanisms in place to keep our body temperature about 97, 98, 99.5 degrees. So we're comfortable when we have that ambient temperature. So we have control mechanisms in place to keep our temperature regulated, and we have mechanisms to have like the balance between heat production and heat loss. So typically, when the body temperature outside, or the temperature outside, the environmental temperature outside exceeds normal range, our body tries to compensate. So it compensates by different ways. So we compensate by sweating. So we'll have sweating to cool ourselves off with evaporation. We compensate by vasodilation in the body. So we try to dilate our vessels so the blood will flow to the surface of the skin in attempts to cool off. So our body is really wonderful. So in regards to who can get heat-related illnesses, anyone can get heat stroke. So I'm going to talk about heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. Heat stroke being basically, it can be fatal. So that's being the most severe of the heat illnesses. So what groups are most vulnerable to heat illnesses? So we have, like was mentioned before, many groups can be vulnerable, especially older adults. Older adults, as we age, our mechanisms to sweat, our mechanisms to tolerate heat are a little bit diminished. People with chronic illnesses and people with certain medications are very vulnerable because chronic illnesses can put us at risk of heat intolerance, and certain medications can do that also. So unfortunately, it sounds like when we get older, we tend to have chronic illnesses, so that compounds our ability to sweat or to tolerate heat. So medications that reduce our ability to sweat include cardiovascular medications, a lot of the blood pressure medications. If you have congestive heart failure, a lot of diuretics such as Lasix and hydrochlorothiazide. A lot of the allergy medications also reduce our ability to sweat. So this is allergy season, so if you're taking Zyrtec, Claritin, Benadryl, Allegra, those reduce our ability to sweat. And some of the diabetic medications like glipizide, glyburide, some of the antidepressants, and almost all the antipsychotics reduce our ability to sweat, to tolerate heat. Also, we have something called photosensitivity. So photosensitivity puts you at increased risk for sunburn. So it's very important to know if you're taking medications such as some of the antibiotics like the tetracycline, doxycycline, sulfa antibiotics like Bactrim. Those put us at risk for sunburn if you take medicine and you go out into the sun. Not only do you have a heat problem, but you also have a problem with potentially sunburning, also with the antihistamines. So anybody can be affected by that. Infants and young children. Infants also have a premature ability to regulate heat. So they have an issue with thermal regulation, so it's up to parents or the caregiver to make sure that we are caring for them appropriately. If there's a heat wave, we have to make sure that they're getting fluids, that they're having adequate number of wet diapers. If you're pregnant, Pregnancy is another vulnerable group that we work with a lot. So any woman who's dehydrated during pregnancy can put you at risk for issues with fetal growth, fetal development in utero, but also at risk for preterm labor. So we want to keep these individuals well hydrated. Lastly, disabled. So disabled individuals rely sometimes on the caregiver. So unfortunately, when we have somebody disabled and they are suffering from heat intolerance or heat exhaustion, we have to be careful and tend to their needs, making sure they're well hydrated, that they're in a place that's cool. So when we envision a cool place, meaning being inside, avoiding the outdoors, having air conditioning on. But one thing I have to say about air conditioning, we have people that have air conditioning. I see a lot of seniors that have air conditioning. They don't want to turn it on because they can't afford it. So that becomes a problem. So I hear that a lot too. I don't turn on my heat, I don't turn on my air because I can't afford it. So we have to be aware of that too. Also, seniors that have dementia or Alzheimer's, cognitive deficits, you have to really pay attention and treat them differently because they forget that they've eaten. They forget that they've had water, or they forget that they've drank water. They won't know unless you're there to prompt them. So they might not feel thirsty either because seniors have a delayed emptying with gastric emptying and delayed thirst response. So they need to drink even though they don't feel thirsty. So we need to be, as caregivers, pay attention to that. So heat-related illness. Heat cramps, so that's the mild, that's the first stage of being, heat exhausted or having heat illness. You have heat cramps. When you start cramping, you have typically your legs, sometimes your abdominal muscles, they can get cramping, and that's from loss of fluids, loss of actually sodium. So your body starts to react and it starts to cramp up. And so the way to treat that, basically you might have profuse sweating, you might feel nauseous, your blood pressure drops, so we call that hypotensive, and your heart rate starts to pump up a little bit, so we call that tachycardia, and your skin is cool and pale and you're sweating, but normally you're awake, you're alert, and your body temperature is actually normal. So when you're in this phase, the recommendation is fluids, the recommendation is to get to a cool area. If you're doing something exertional, such as working outdoors or exercising, we recommend that you stop, go indoors where there's a cool place, whether you have a fan or air conditioning, or you go to a cooling center, drink fluids and cool down. So this is a phase where we can really intervene and do something to prevent it from progressing. Now, heat exhaustion is a little bit more severe. You have headache, dizziness, fatigue, you have nausea, confusion, you become weak. You can faint, so syncope means some people faint because they're overwhelmed from heat. You have profuse perspiration, you're pale, your heart rate speeds up, your blood pressure drops, your respiration rate speeds up, and orthostatic changes means like if you're sitting and you stand up, you feel weak, you feel dizzy, and you might pass out. But your temperature here, your core temperature, which is done typically rectally, core temperature is normal. So at this phase, we also we recommend fluid replacement, so making sure that they're able to cool down, taking to a cool area. Sometimes what works a lot is spraying somebody with a spray mist with a water bottle and having a fan on. So if you don't have air conditioning but you have a fan, you get a water bottle, you do a mist, and the fan will help you evaporate and cool you down. So that's one mechanism, and also giving water. So the next, or the last phase, the one that's critical, is heat stroke. So heat stroke is a medical emergency. So this is not the phase where you give water, you cool down. This is the point in time where you call 911 and they need medical evaluation. They need to be transported because heat stroke can be fatal. They can quickly go, heat stroke is any temperature basically 104 degrees and above, and that's their core body temperature. They need to be transported because they can die. So any individual with signs of heat stroke need to be transported. So heat stroke, by definition, temperature of 104 degrees and higher. Their skin tends to be red, hot, dry skin. A lot of times they don't have sweating at this stage. They have stopped sweating, but you can't really clinically go by just sweating alone, lack of sweating or presence of sweating to say it's heat stroke. So don't let that be a guide. But most of the time they have stopped sweating, they have a rapid pulse, they have a headache, dizziness, nausea, low blood pressure, but they also have like mental status changes. So they can have confusion and seizures, so that's pretty critical. So at this point, you're not offering water, you're not offering rehydration, you're really transporting, calling 911, and getting them to the hospital to get proper treatment. Okay, so just to sum it up, heat stroke is an emergency. You need to call 911. This is not a time where we can intervene at this point. So the next slide is just a nice slide that I put in there because it has on the right, it has all the symptoms and when you can do first aid, when first aid is appropriate. And then when you see heat stroke, first aid is really calling 911 because that is life-threatening and not, it is not appropriate to just provide basic first aid out in the field. So hot weather tips. I have left a couple of trifold flyers on protecting, those are it. Protecting against heat injuries. So they're in English and Spanish, and I left them with my colleagues, environmental health. So the hot weather tips. So the health department has, oh, that's the wrong slide. The health department does a pretty good job about putting out health advisories and health alerts. So we pay attention to the heat index, and if we see the heat index at a certain point, 2 or 3 days in a row, we issue out an alert to everybody, all the hospitals, the providers, our community partners. So this is really critical. So at that time, we open up our cooling centers throughout the city. Most of them are public buildings that have air conditioning. We extend those hours for individuals that need a place to go to cool down. They tend to be like our parks and our libraries and certain community centers that we have throughout the city. So the key is to stay hydrated, drink fluids, stay indoors if it's cool, or go to a cooling place, a cooling location. With fluids, avoid caffeine, avoid alcohol. It's very dehydrating. So when we talk about fluids, we're talking about water, or even like Gatorade or a sports drink because they have electric lights, and if you lost sodium, it helps replace it. But no caffeine, no alcohol, that makes you dehydrated, so that'll just make you feel worse. And with older adults, we have to not only take care of ourselves, but with older adults, if you have a neighbor, friend, or family, you should check on them twice a day. You should call them or visit them like in the middle of the day or in the morning. The middle of the day tends to be the hottest, around 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. Heat tends to peak. And check on them again later in the day. So they should be checked on twice a day because they can quickly go from being heat exhausted to having heat stroke. And once that happens, unfortunately, you can die or you can have permanent neurological damage. So that can also occur. So with that said, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And then we'll move on to the next speaker.
I'd like to introduce our last and next speaker. This is Jake Heflin. He's from the Community Emergency Response Team CERT with the Fire Department. Thank you, Jake.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to blow everybody out of the water with this microphone, but I'll do my best to keep it down as much as I can. You know, it's an interesting topic to have everyone here participate in this conversation. I guess my question is, why are you specifically here? Give me some feedback. Why are you here? Why are you sitting in this room? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm here to listen to this exposition and also to have some comments regarding it. Because it seems that we are a little bit late on this climate change, let's say protection or preparation or whatever.
Okay, so we feel like we're a little bit behind schedule, behind the curve here.
Exactly.
Okay.
I would like to add a few things after you finish.
You want to hear some more about that? What else? Why are you here? What else? Yes, ma'am.
Just to get educated on the issues and what can be done and how to prepare.
Perfect. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
I want to see what I can do
what you can do.
Yeah.
Good.
I feel like I'm doing everything I can, like, environmental friendly, I guess, like composting or like trying to go farmers market. But I don't know what's the next step.
Okay.
So
Individual actions that you can individually do. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
To urge people to contact their member of Congress to put more pressure on them to take action.
So more political advocacy. Okay. Good. Anything? Anybody else? Yeah.
So we just, my girlfriend and I, just wanted to bring awareness and let people know that animal agriculture is actually the leading cause of climate change. There's a lot of resources behind it, backing it, and it's just a matter of educating yourself.
Education and causes behind it, animal agriculture. Okay.
Leading cause.
All right. Wonderful. So it sounds like there's a wide variety of background and knowledge and experience relating to these issues that we're talking about today. And really, a couple of you said, and I thought this was interesting, because a couple of you said specifically, I want to know what I can do. Right? How can I fix this? How can I be a part of this solution? Well, that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. It's about what you can do personally to make yourself more prepared. Because it all starts with that level, that decision that you make to make a difference. We know that it's happening. We are very aware that this is happening. Matter of fact, the statistics tell us it does. And we can see all these models that are up here on the board. We know this is something that we have to deal with. And we have seen it happening in our city as well when we have these rainstorms and these flooding events and these heat waves that we have that are significant. Right? I see it as a 911 provider. Right? I'm the one that's responding to those emergencies. But I can tell you an interesting thing here, and I was doing a little bit of research before this discussion, but it said, here's only a small sample of costs happening already with global warming influenced extreme weather. And get this, NOAA, right, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which tracks U.S. billion-dollar disaster events resulting from extreme weather, has found that severe storms caused losses, here we go, listen to this, $8 billion in the 1980s, $26 billion in the 1990s, $43 billion in the 2000s, and $78 billion thus far in the 2010s. In the past few years, the United States has experienced nearly 50 climate-related disasters, each costing taxpayers over $1 billion. And in 2017 alone, total combined cost of U.S. global warming aggravated disasters was about, get this, $500 billion, with Hurricane Harvey alone exceeded $300 billion. And Hurricanes Irma and Marie and many wildfires and mudslides in where? California. So, why do I say that? Well, I was deployed on the Woolsey fire for 13 days in Malibu, right? I was assigned there as a public information officer for that event. And I have been obviously aware and seeing a significant intake in large catastrophic events throughout the state and the country. And I travel all over the country talking about preparedness and things that we can do to make our communities more safe and more resilient. But it starts with each one of us because it's little small steps that make a big difference in preparedness. Because it's about being proactive versus being reactive. Matter of fact, statistics say for every dollar we spend in preparedness, we save $7 to $10 in response and recovery. Let me say that again. Every dollar we spend in preparedness, we save $7 to $10 in response and recovery. Now, if you could invest in the stock market, and you knew you were going to invest a dollar, and you were going to get $7 to $10 back, guaranteed, would you invest? Every one of you would. But yet, when we talk about preparedness, for some reason, we just, I'll get to it later. I'll handle it when I need to. But that's the challenge. Because we may not have the opportunity to handle it later because everyone else is thinking the same way. So there are little things that we can do to make a big difference. And we talk about preparedness because it's about a message. The message has to get out there. Because I can tell you that even the small things that we take for granted. For instance, we talk about changing your clocks, right, and changing your smoke detector batteries. Well, how many of you actually have a home fire escape plan at your house whether you review with your kids or your grandkids? Maybe a couple of you. But every day, like at least once or twice a year when you were in high school, you did what? A fire drill. And you knew exactly what to do when the fire alarm went off. First of all, you were like, yes, because what, you were usually in the middle of a test. Right? And then you walked out, and then you walked in an orderly fashion and went to a predetermined location and stood there while they did roll. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you right now that if you were to get on a plane, right, and go ahead and finish this message for me. You get on the plane, you have an exit where? Front of the plane, right? Over the wings and to the rear, right? And should we have an in-flight emergency over water, our seat cushion can be used as a what? A personal flotation device. And should we lose cabin pressure, right, 2 masks will pop from the ceiling, and you are to put the mask on who first before you put it on yourself? Yourself first, right, before you put it on your child. Now, listen, you just told me about what to do with an aircraft emergency, which is far less likely to happen to you than a home fire. And why is that? Why? Because you hear the message over and over and over again. And the reason I'm here talking to you today about this is we have to get on board with the message. We've got to push the message out because we all have ownership. Because disasters know no boundaries. It doesn't matter who you are, the color of your skin, your race, gender, ethnicity, marital status, right? It's a great equalizer. It just doesn't say we're going to hit Long Beach and leave Lakewood out today. Right? That's not how disasters work. And so when we get into these conversations, it's important that we take these steps to teach ourselves what to do and how to act appropriately. And so when I tell you an earthquake, for instance, were to happen, what are you supposed to do? Well, here's the interesting. We've talked about this, right? We're supposed to drop, cover, and hold. Now, I have to laugh because stop, drop, and roll, it would look very awkward if you were to stop, drop, and roll when the earthquake happened, but you knew there were 3 things you were supposed to do. Right? Remember, we stop, drop, and roll when what? Our clothes are on fire. We cover our face and we roll on the ground. We don't need to roll when the earthquake's happening. It's already doing that for us. But the point is that we need to know what we're supposed to do. And so there are little things like I talk about even earthquakes, right? And potentially there's going to be, based on what we're seeing with even this discussion about global warming and what we call Climageddon. Have you heard that term before? Climageddon? Armageddon? Climageddon? Anyways, when they talk about this, some of the things that they talk about are an increase in tsunamis. And why do they say that? When they talk about the ice sheets melting, right? They're talking about changes in tectonic plates. Changes in tectonic plates also cause what? Earthquakes, increased volcanic activity, tsunamis, right? So these are potential impacts that we deal with potentially here locally. As a matter of fact, history repeats itself. And Long Beach is on the what? The Newport-Inglewood Fault and had a catastrophic event in 1933. So we know that we have to take these things seriously. So when we talk about things that I can do to be more prepared, what might that look like? It might be as simple as this. Take an old bag, right? One of the reusable bags that you have at the store, right? Because Long Beach is a green city, we want to make sure we take a reusable bag. We want to put an old pair of shoes in that reusable bag, and we want to put a flashlight in that bag and tie it to our bedpost. Why? Because when that earthquake happens, what's the first thing we talk about doing? Drop, cover, and hold, right? If it happens in the middle of the night and I happen to have some windows next to my bed, the first step I take, right, is on now potentially broken glass. And now I become part of the problem versus the solution. Because now somebody has to come take care of me. But if I have that bag with that old pair of shoes and that flashlight tied to the bedpost, I roll out of bed, I drop, cover, and hold. Right there at the bed, at that bedpost, is that old pair of shoes and that flashlight that I put on, turn the flashlight on, and go take care of myself and my family. Now, is that a big, huge effort to be more prepared that way? Not really. It's about putting a pair of shoes in there and a flashlight. But could it make a big difference between whether or not you cut your feet versus whether or not you can go help other people? That's to the point where, what can I do individually? Right? What can I do personally to make a difference? It's little steps that make a huge change when disaster strikes. It's also about getting to know your neighbors, right? And I think for some reason we live in the world now where back in the 40s and 50s, right, everyone knew each other. But that's not how our neighborhoods are now. Matter of fact, when's the time we see each other? When do we see our neighbors? Trash day, right? We see them trash day. Why? Because we take the trash out on the curb and we say, hey, well, how you doing? Right, we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Right, you take your trash back, and that's it. You might not even have a conversation with them, but collectively, right, if we have a conversation with our neighbors, not only are we increasing our safety because we know each other, right? And we know that person shouldn't be here versus that person is here, right? So we have an increase in safety. Not to mention, we collectively bring a better skill set. Because, for instance, in my neighborhood, right, I got a plumber there, I got an electrician off to the side, I got this guy who's a prepper on the corner, right? He's got everything known to mankind. You know, I mean, we all have skills that we bring, you know, a nurse, the firefighter, right? We all have skills that we bring as a community that makes us stronger. But if we don't have the conversations, we don't know those vulnerable populations that you've heard here today, right? The elderly that are bed confined, that are predisposed at more risk, the youth, the kids, right? We don't know where those kids are. It's our responsibility to know our neighbors. And when we start looking at some of these large catastrophic fires, who are the people that are getting killed? Elderly, bed confined, limited mobility because no one knew they were home. No one knew to check on them. That's shame on us. Because we need to be taking care of each other. That's our old adage, right? That one arrow will snap, but that bundle of arrows collectively can't be broken. The same is true about our communities and our neighborhoods. But we need to take steps now to make that difference. And that's exactly why I'm here today talking about preparedness. So what can you do? Well, it's about having a disaster plan. Knowing basically who you're going to call, who's that out-of-state contact that you're going to call an emergency, right? We have that earthquake here. What's the first thing everyone's going to try to do? Call each other. You okay? Are you okay? Are you right? We're not going to be able to do that. You might get one call out to somebody, and that's that out-of-state contact that you want to make sure you know who that out-of-state contact is so you can send them a message. I'm okay. And then your brother and your cousin, your wife, your son, right? They send that same person that message. I'm okay. And then that one person that's in the area that's not impacted can send the message back. Everyone checked in. They're fine. Right? Then we also need to have that safe meeting place. Right? Whether it's our home or whether it's out in a tree in front of our home, just like a fire. Right? So I can tell you right now, that safe meeting place becomes really important for my son. I have a little 8-year-old at home. And we practiced this discussion and this conversation. Matter of fact, we had it as a little Cub Scout skill day, right? Where the kids came over and I pushed the smoke detector. They all heard the smoke detector, what it was sounding like, and then we talked about what do you do afterwards, right? We talked about, remember when you fuel the door for heat, right? And then you get on the ground and crawl low because the smoke and heat rise, so the area that's going to be survivable is going to be low to the ground. Well, once you get low to the ground, where do you go? You got to go outside. Right? But you got to have that safe meeting place outside because my son's a very social child. Right? Got that, right from that, right? And if I don't tell him, son, you're going to go to this tree and you're going to glue your little behind to this tree and tell mom or dad, get out here, where's he going to go? To my neighbors. Because I just know I know he will because he's afraid. But if I don't see him at that tree, where do I think he is? He's still in the house. And then I'm going to go back in the house, even though we say don't go back in the house. I don't know a parent that wouldn't go back in the house for their child. But these are those things that if we don't practice it and we don't have the conversations, that results in significant impacts to our families. So we all practiced it. They crawled out, they went over and they glued themselves to that tree, and I said, you stay exactly there until we come out and get you. Because if not, I don't know where he's going to go. And we have to practice it over and over and over again. We have to have the conversations over and over again. Because that's what builds that muscle memory, just like you told me that your seat can be used as a personal flotation device. So these are those things that we need to do to make a big difference today for when those events happen. I didn't say if, but for when, because they will happen. History tells us they do. So that's really one of the reasons why I'm here and why I'm so passionate about this. Because we can make a difference together, but we need to take steps now to do that. We need to have enough water to take care of ourselves and our families. That's a gallon of water per person per day. A gallon of water per person per day. A family of 4, that's 4 gallons. And we are telling people have enough water for 7 to 10 days. That's potentially 28 gallons for a family of 4. That's 2 quarts daily for consumption. That's 2 quarts for personal hygiene. And then what to do when the boil water goes in effect, right? If we tell you the water's not safe for drinking, how do you purify that water? How do you get that water available for consumption, right? It's 8 drops of unscented, not lavender fragrance, unscented household bleach per gallon of water. The water's cloudy, it's 16 drops of unscented household bleach per gallon of water. Let it stand for about 30 minutes before consumption. We tell you what a boil order is. We say a boil order is in effect, but to purify that water, you want to bring that water to a rolling boil for at least 30 seconds to a minute. Right? Before you let it cool before you consume it. These are those things that you now need to arm yourself with to understand what your roles and responsibilities are as the public. Have that go bag, right? We talked about that out-of-state contact. Have that little go bag, because I'm going to tell you, not only have it in your car, but also have it at home. Because your car is where you are when that disaster strikes if you're on the road. You better make sure you have a pair of comfortable shoes, because you might be out at that special event in Glendale and you're rocking those heels that you just bought just for that event when that disaster strikes. And I'm going to tell you, that white hike from Glendale back to Long Beach in high heels, not a pleasant experience most likely. Right? So you better make sure you have a comfortable pair of shoes. You better make sure you have some warm clothing. You better make sure you have a flashlight. We talk about having information. And this is going to be one of those things that it sounds silly, but think about this. We have the iPhones and the Androids now. Walk through your house and take a video of your entire home. Why would you do that? Because if you are experiencing catastrophic loss and you are now trying to recoup that money from the financial loss, the devastation you've experienced, now you have a video of everything that in your house that you can also submit to your insurance company through the insurance claims process. Because I can tell you right now, when I bought my house in Long Beach in 2009, it looks much different than it did when I initially bought it. Not to mention, I've sunk my whole life savings into this remodel. Right? And then I lose everything, and I said, well, we had all this stuff in there. They said, do you have any proof of that? No, I lost it all in the fire. Or I lost it all in the earthquake. Or I lost it all in the flood. You have to have documented support to help you process this. And unfortunately, yesterday, I had just a devastating phone call with an individual that had a fire in her home. And she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, did you have renter's insurance? And she said, no. No one told me I needed renter's insurance. And now she's trying to pick up the pieces because all of her clothes smell like smoke. All the blankets and all the bedding smells like smoke. All the furniture, the beds, right? Everything is just smells like smoke. And she's like, I don't know what to do with where do I go? What do I do? And it was a very helpless feeling to have this conversation with this woman on the other side. And I said, here's some steps that you might be able to do, but you're going to have to reach out to a restoration company because there's some things that they're going to do to try to minimize that smoke damage to some of those clothing items and the bedding. But that costs money. But when I talk about taking extra efforts now to prepare, right, for what we might pay in renter's insurance, what might equivalent to a cup of coffee a day, in the long term, right, having that renter's insurance or the homeowner's insurance could be vital to your recovery after a disaster or catastrophic event. But for some reason, we're not willing to pay or invest in ourselves. Folks, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you can make a significant difference today for tomorrow. To be more prepared, to be more resilient, the ability to bounce back. We have to take steps because it's coming. We see the statistics, we see the maps, we see the data. But we have ownership, we have a personal responsibility. And we have to step into that and make that commitment, not only to ourselves, but to our family. And through that process, to our city. Because collectively, we are stronger together. And that's why I'm here. The Long Beach Fire Department offers a program free to the community, paid for and supported by your city government. It's called the Community Emergency Response Team. It's 22 hours of training. It's free. You come over and you hang out with over a weekend with me, right? Get to hear me lecture to you all for like 3 days. And we talk about preparedness. We talk about fire safety. We talk about disaster medical operations. We talk about disaster psychology. We talk about terrorism. We talk about communications. We talk about having these plans. And after that process, right, now you become what we call a registered disaster service worker in the state of California. And I can activate you and utilize you for events like we used the CERT team during the power outages that we experienced downtown. Again, to this point, I want to encourage you to participate in that. If you're interested in that, please make sure you see me. I'd love to invite you to participate. We do about 3 or 4 classes a year. We also do a Teen Cert program for our young adults because they're our future as well. And I'm going to tell you, we have a large event in September called Ready Long Beach. This will be, I think, our 5th year coming up here. But I want to share something with you. The efforts that your city are making, right to your point, sir, about what's the city doing, we feel a little bit like we're slow to the game here. I'm going to tell you, your Long Beach CERT program and Ready Long Beach won the 2017 FEMA Individual Community Preparedness Award for the entire country on what we're doing to prepare Long Beach and make Long Beach more ready and more resilient. You have a lot to be proud of for all the work that's being done in this room, from my peers on the panel, to the people that are around you in this room while working these different tables. Because together, we can make a difference. Thank you very much.
And Karen Reside from is going to be telling us her personal story of the power outage.
Okay, I'll talk. If you want to get up and get pizza, I won't be offended. So while the pizza's hot, and I'm going to tell you about my personal experience in the power outage. I live in a 17-story building in downtown Long Beach, which has about 200 residents, all of them primarily age 62 or older. A lot of people were in the building on July 15th, 2015, when the power went out about 4:45. The first indication that something was wrong was we heard a blast. We heard a loud bang. We didn't know if we were under attack by terrorists or something had blown up. It turned out that there was a fire in the underground electrical stations. So some of us began gathering in the lobby. We had a brand new building manager who had just started that day. She was scheduled to leave at 5 o'clock, which is, we went down there and we said, there's something wrong. We need to know what to do. And she says goodbye and left for the day. So we had 200 seniors, and because 7 of us had gone to CERT training, like the 2 months before, we jumped into action. We had our plan, we put it into effect, we ran around and knocked on all the doors, we marked the doors with chalk of the people that were home so we knew who was there and who wasn't. We immediately checked to see who needed water and that everybody was okay. We kicked into action thanks to this gentleman right here and his amazing program. I think it should be mandatory that everybody over the age of 16 goes through this program. When the third day came around, and there's a number of issues when you lose power that you don't think about. And a large portion of us did not have our cell phones charged. So right away, you cannot charge your cell phone. You cannot communicate. The city's sending information via the Go Long Beach app, for which a lot of us couldn't get any information. They sent everything out by tweet through the mayor's office. So we were immediately disconnected from all resources within the city. We had no manager, we had no access to the emergency plan in the building and what was supposed to happen. So we took care of our own, we set up our station, and mind you, I'm on the 17th floor. One of the things we discovered was our elevators, even though they had just bought a $35,000 backup generator, $5,000 backup generator, it was not attached to the electrical system. So we had people that slept on benches in the lobby because we did not know where our community safe spot was, and we did not know that the passport bus is supposed to be rerouted in the event of an emergency to pick up from downtown areas. And Cesar Chavez, we now know, is our safe place. And there was food over there. When the power goes out, you immediately lose anything in your refrigerator after a period of hours. So we had a barbecue first night, so the food didn't go to waste. and we had a big party. About half the people in our building are diabetic, so immediately we had to deal with how do they keep their medications safe. We had people on oxygen that did not have backup generators. So these people had to be emergency evacuated. One of them was one of my neighbors who weighed over 300 pounds, and I watched 6 firefighters carry her down in an emergency evacuation chair, because our building has emergency evacuation chairs. A lot of buildings do not. It would have been very ugly if we wouldn't have had the chairs. 3 days, and when they tell you that it's going to be 3 days before emergency personnel are going to get around to checking and see if you're okay, that's about how long it took. And Rich Brandt from the fire department came to the building, and since our managers had decided it was a weekend, so our manager decided not to come in because she didn't know what to do anyway. I think I just spoke to Rich Brandt. I'm our CERT leader in our building. So when I told him what we had done, he was absolutely amazed. And I gave big props to Jake, because without that CERT training, we would have been like the other senior buildings that didn't know what to do. So we took care of ourselves. We got community volunteers to bring us water. And one of the things you learn is that you can't flush your toilet past the 5th floor, because that's all the farther that a water pump will go up. And after 3 days of not flushing toilets, you have to begin to worry about other things. So we survived, and on the 3.5 days, we got a generator from SCE because of a lot of pressure on SCE. So I cannot stress to you how much and how important it is to go to these trainings and learn how to prepare and to have a plan. Rich Brandt said we were the best prepared building of all the buildings that they had visited in the city. Yeah. So, and it just goes to show you that seniors are not incompetent. They are capable of taking care of themselves, and everybody should be prepared.
Thank you, Karen. I just might say that Karen is secretary of the Long Beach Gray Panthers, and it's an issue that we're very much interested in, the Gray Panthers. This business of having an emergency evacuation chair, luckily that building did have it, but the thought is that all high-rise should have this, and we're interested in possibly doing some legislative redress of the question of safety for high-rise buildings, and making it mandatory for high-rise buildings to have emergency evacuation chairs and emergency plans for disasters such as this. So that's one issue that the Gray Panthers are working on. Now, we have our panel, and we're asking them to talk about solutions for seniors for this heat rise. So if we could, how about Edric? We haven't heard from him. 10 minutes each.
Thanks, Myron. I hope this is close enough. I gotta put my notes down here so I can follow along. So thanks everybody for coming out. My name is Edric Guys. I'm a group leader with the Citizens Climate Lobby organization. We have a Long Beach, South Bay chapter here, which is pretty active, and it's wonderful to have community support for our group and for this event and the Clean Air Action Plan. There's a couple of things that I'll just highlight for you about our organization, about the solutions that we pursue in coordination with lots of other entities, including a bunch of folks that are here today. And part of that is just understanding the context of what you're seeing in front of you. You have a great deal of focus in the city of Long Beach and research and activism that's specific to what we do here. And this is a worldwide problem. So there's different groups that focus on different arenas and different pieces of the solution, all of which are critically important to a comprehensive planet-wide approach to getting us over this hurdle for ourselves and our families and our children. So you have our group. We focus almost exclusively on the U.S. Congress. About 8% of our time is on trying to get a solution through our U.S. Congress because our nation has fallen behind in any leadership when it comes to addressing climate solutions. So there's a great deal of activism in a democracy like ours that has to be nurtured to put that kind of pressure on our Congress. We also have in the state of California our Air Resources Board, which we aren't talking much about today, but this is one of the great things we have as a citizen in our state is a comprehensive climate plan that's in place at the state level that's being modeled worldwide by other organizations. It's been vetted by over a decade of negotiation between environmental groups, industry groups, really wonderful set of experts at the Air Board, nurtured by our elected officials and the California Air Board members themselves. It's really a bit of a miracle which falls under the radar for a lot of us. So I wanted to highlight that because it is a critical piece of the solution, and it's happening in real time, a balance of regulations and some market mechanisms that they use there as well. I do also want to talk about the breadth of solutions. There's a book called Drawdown. It's an organization called Drawdown. It's comprised of professionals in the different realms, really worldwide experts, PhDs in the Dr. Lentz world, and they are analyzing the top 100 solutions for the climate. The number one solution is replacing a refrigerant, which we use very little of here in the United States, but which is used worldwide much more broadly for air conditioning. We have to get rid of that darn refrigerant to really get this problem under control. And there's the more obvious solutions that we focus on, fossil fuel reduction and 100% clean energy, as we should here in the U.S. But there's also important social elements of the climate solution, like women's education worldwide, which don't get a lot of attention right now, but they are in that, I think it's the number 6 solution in the top 100, all of which we need to focus on. And that Project Drawdown initiative identifies the cost and the benefit of each piece of this very a puzzle that's like a web of solutions. So for CCL, our Citizens Climate Lobby group, we focus on a pricing mechanism on fossil fuels that's now been introduced in the U.S. Congress. We focus on this particular type of solution because it does have bipartisan support. There are Republicans and Democrats who are supporting this legislation. It has, the first introduction of it happened in the Senate and the House last fall. I know that my friends at, I was going to say AB 273, but at 350.org are focused on the Green New Deal, which is another important piece of this puzzle at the national level. Our group is focused on trying to get something through Congress as soon as possible because we can't wait for solutions to start and get underway. And all of them are important, of course. So this is H.R. 763 is the name of the bill. We are focusing on it as not a wedge issue. Climate, as the councilman mentioned at the beginning of our session today, has become a wedge issue, a hyper-partisan issue in the U.S. Congress, and we're trying to turn it into a bridge issue. And I know that many of the like-minded organizations, 350 and all the other environmental groups that are focused on this, are trying to build support across the aisle to get our Congress to act. There is precedent. It does, in this hyper-partisan atmosphere that we're in, there's a lot of hopelessness that can arise, understandably, but we do have the precedent of prison sentencing reform that was worked on for years amongst members of Congress across the aisle. It was recently approved and signed by the president. Certainly not the final solution on that particular issue, but a huge step in the right direction. And we see these kinds of precedent as a source of hope for the near-term type of solution that HR 763 can be for our country and more broadly the world. So the last thing I'd say is just a little bit about HR 763 itself, what it is. This is a solution that Citizens Climate Lobby has been working on for a few years. It's called carbon fee and dividend. There's a fee that's placed on all carbon fuels when they're extracted from the ground. That money is then redistributed back to the people as a way to help soften the impact of the economy change that's necessary as we evolve away from fossil fuels and move into clean energy much more purposefully and quickly than we otherwise would. So this type of program has broad support. Nobel laureates, there were over 50 leading economists that served the presidents of our country, took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal. There's nation-leading business organizations that are supporting climate solutions, which are advocating for this solution as well. So it's not just our environmental groups. There's a lot of legwork amongst from our group, 350 and other groups in building support throughout the community, business community, environmental community, government community, in order to get these solutions moving. And it really takes that kind of legwork to move us beyond this kind of partisanship, as they say, the wedge issue that it has been heretofore. So our table is over here. If you're interested in connecting with us, that's great. Even just on an informational level, signing up will put you on an email list for information, and you can get involved as much or as little as you want. Even a little bit is important for all of us because cumulatively it ends up making a huge difference. So thanks for your time today, and we'll look forward to the Clean Air Action Plan getting approved here in Long Beach and seeing more of the fruits of that happen for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Edric. Edric, I have a question for you. Why is it 350? What does that number mean?
I'll let Dean answer that one. Nice transition.
350 refers to 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That was identified as a safe level. At that level, we have a planet that's been like the one that we've had for like 35 million years, where you have water in liquid form, you have water vapor, and you have ice in glaciers and the poles year round. So 350 parts per million is what it was for a long, long time. We're at about 410 right now, so way above it. And you know the glaciers are melting, all these other things are happening. So 350 is a target for a safe climate, that we have to bring down the greenhouse gases to that level. So it was started with that idea. So I'm going to move from 35 million year plan to a short-term plan. One question was, what can we do for seniors in housing? My thinking was more about just for anybody who's a low-income renter, okay, which includes a lot of seniors. And this is a short-term plan. It's not an emergency plan like the cooling centers. It's not the kind of plan where you change the building envelope when you paint the roofs and all of that, because that's something that the building owner has to do. This is something that we could do for renters. I think one is to provide the equipment to cool the places. You know, fans and how to set them up, security screening so you can leave the doors open at night, window shades, the plastic film with reflection on the outside, mirrors, all of that. Those are things that a tenant could put into their apartment. Okay, I think a big one is air conditioning. When the unit doesn't have air conditioning, the standalone units that have the exhaust pipe out the window is something that we could do. That would immediately cool an apartment through a heat wave. We need to develop those units in a way that don't use the dangerous refrigerants, so that's something to do. But you know, if you have any money or you live in a decent place, you got air conditioning. If you're poor, it's hard to do. I think those things cost about $400 or $500. That's going to use more electricity. So we also have to acquire enough renewable electricity to match the new load for the air conditioning that's coming. And they're expensive. You know, if we're talking about low-income tenants, a lot of them can't make it through the month, so we need to provide a subsidy to either make it very, very cheap or free to protect lives. So air conditioning, good refrigerants, renewable energy to match the electricity demand, and to make it financially affordable to a low-income tenant. So that would be like a short-term, but not a crisis response. And that's just some brainstorming that I was doing about how to do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. As I said, after the panel makes their presentation, questions from the audience are appreciated, and there are cards that was given out. So write your questions down and give them to me, and we will ask them of the panel. Jennifer?
So I don't know about anybody else, but I'm also a visual learner, so I brought a PowerPoint for this portion as well. So this morning I focused a lot on the impacts, but what really keeps me going are the solutions. So after we wrote the report that advised the mayor on how to become the model of a climate resilient city, I then spent the next year developing a climate resilient outreach booth that we bring to community events around Long Beach, talking to people about what they love most about Long Beach, what they value. And then we reframe that in terms of how what they value is being impacted by climate change and what we can do together to protect what we love and prepare what we love for the impacts of climate change. So these are some of the responses we're getting from community members about what we love most about our city. You can see parks, beach, diversity, community. That's what makes Long Beach Long Beach. It's what we love about our city. And then this is really exciting for me because when we ask people what we can do to protect and prepare our city to keep what we love moving forward, you notice the words aren't as big because there's so many ideas that community members are coming up with what we can do. And this is exciting to me because it's all about communities. So thinking about what Long Beach can do to make itself a resilient city, we're doing all kinds of things. So recently, there was a report that came out in Mother Jones that said Long Beach is one of the largest cities in California, and we have a plan to dramatically reduce the impacts of temperature. So our city is doing it from the city level, but we're also doing it from the community level. So some ideas for what our city is doing for extreme heat. We are going in and we're in the process of upgrading all of our public schools to get air conditioning online. It's gonna take a while, but we need air conditioning in our school systems with our extreme heat events. We have cooling centers throughout the city of Long Beach, urban community centers, libraries, they're all cooling centers where people can go in extreme heat events. We also have a number of programs going out. We're planting trees throughout the city. Tree canopies do a great deal to reduce urban heat. If anybody's familiar with I Dig Long Beach, it's a funded event. It's funded through the Port of Long Beach, and they're paying for quite a few trees. It's between 6,000 and 10,000. And community members come out and we plant these trees in areas that need it, where residents are caring for it. This is a graphic that I put together that gave an idea of how often to water our drought-tolerant trees to make sure that they make it. But trees do quite a bit for our environment. Everything from one fully established tree is the equivalent of 10 air conditioners running daily for a year in terms of the amount of cooling. Tree canopied streets also reduce urban heat island effect because the sun isn't hitting the pavement. Your streets also don't have to get paved as often because the sun isn't hitting it. People are more likely to spend more time in their front yards than their backyards because they have the shaded environment front, which builds community because you're getting to know your neighbors, you're in your front yards. Cars drive slower down tree canopied streets, so you have less accidents. There's also less crime because you have more people in the front yard getting to know each other, and you're building community. Not to mention that trees also filter air pollutants out of our air, so we're breathing cleaner air. They raise property values. They also they reduce crime. They reduce urban flooding because they're absorbing the water and taking it straight down to the water table. I literally can't say enough good things about trees, but we need to be caring for our trees. We need to improve the maintenance program of them. We need to make sure that in extreme droughts, we're still watering them when they need to be watered so that they aren't becoming weaker. We need to make sure we're thinning the canopy so that when we get extreme rain events, they don't start to fail. But trees are a huge part of resilience. In terms of things that everybody can do, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, this is all stuff that I did as a renter and continued to do as a homeowner. So this was mentioned in some of the previous talks. You can buy removable window film. Not all window film is removable, so if you're a renter, make sure you get removable window film so that your landlords don't get mad at you when you leave. But this dramatically reduces how much heat is coming in through your windows. All of my windows when I was a renter, in addition to putting the window film up, I also put blackout curtains up. Reducing how much heat comes into your home dramatically decreases how hot it gets inside. I also had, in addition to some of my rentals had ceiling fans, but I also put tower fans all over the place because just circulating air makes a huge difference. I now have a house with central air. I still have tower fans in every room of my house because I greatly reduce turning on my air conditioner just by having fans on. So that's something anybody can do. Every rental I lived in, I turned off the central heat, mainly because they were floor heaters or wall heaters, and I had a dog and didn't want her to bump into an extremely hot heater and burn herself. But now I have central heat that would run through the same duct system as my air conditioner, and I've never turned it on in the 3 years I've owned my home. I still use space heaters because I only heat the rooms that I'm in. I only heat them for a few minutes until they become the temperature I want, and then I turn them off. And modern space heaters have thermostats that you can set what temperature you want it on, and it only kicks on when you drop below that temperature. If you look at my gas usage, the red was when I first moved into the house before I revamped my home with space heaters. Just in terms of my fossil fuel consumption, you can see how much it's dramatically dropped, and I'm more comfortable because I'm not overheating in my house and I don't have extreme gas bills during the winter. My garage, I put in insulation in the panels of the garage to reduce how much heat is coming in through my garage door. If you're a renter that's lucky enough to have a garage, you can also do this because they're removable, but it greatly insulates your garage. I added my own insulation to my attic. This dramatically changed how comfortable I am in my home. I have friends that live a block away from me, and they're waking up this past winter when it was freezing, and their homes were in the 40s and 50s because they also weren't turning on their heaters. Mine never dropped below 65. And it was because of the insulation I did myself. I didn't hire anybody to do this. I did it myself over the course of 3 days. 3 days that I was off of work. It took about a month, but I did it before Long Beach had their 100+ degree multi-day event in October. And during that time, I noticed that I was monitoring my air conditioner from work through my digital thermostat. It used to kick on and off all day long, even though I set it for 80 degrees. After I put in this insulation, it kicked on for the first time when it was 110 degrees outside my house. It kicked on for the first time at 6 p.m. because that was when it hit over 80 degrees inside my house. So thinking about how much my energy bills dropped just from adding insulation and radiant barrier. That's harder to do if you're a renter, but if anybody's a homeowner or renters that lobby their landlords can do that. Things the city's doing for drought. We have great lawn to garden programs. They've actually, I think it's effective April 1st. They're expanding it for funding to also redo your backyard as well as front yard, which is really exciting. We've got recycled water programs going in throughout the city, underground cisterns, stormwater capture. In terms of things you can do at home, if you aren't quite ready to give up your lawn, there are ways that dramatically reduce your fossil fuel and water usage to keep your existing lawn and make it healthier. So this is my backyard, and when I moved in, I had a gardener that used a gas-powered lawnmower. He insisted on me watering my lawn. I had it set for the city plan of 10 to 20 minutes 3 times a week during that portion of the year. I found that he was watering it every time he came as well, so it was actually using quite a bit more water. And this is what my lawn looked like. It was rotting, it didn't look good. I now, during the hottest times of the year, I water it anywhere from 30 minutes once a week to every other week. By November, I was watering it once a month for 30 minutes. I've had my irrigation turned off since December. I still haven't turned it back on because of our rains. And I switched to a hand-powered lawnmower without a bag. So there's no fossil fuels. I'm mowing it myself. I'm getting exercise. All the trimmings stay on the lawn, which greatly reduces how much evaporation is happening. I also dig holes into my lawn, and the roots are going much deeper. I have the best lawn on my block, and I'm the only one that hasn't. I watch everybody's sprinkler systems go on. This is what I changed. I changed how I'm doing it. So I didn't rip out my lawn, but I'm saying that for people who aren't quite ready to remove their lawn and switch to a drought-tolerant system, there are things everybody can do right now that dramatically reduces your water, dramatically reduces your fossil fuel usage, gets you exercise, and creates a healthier lawn. So there are things that everybody can do. Other things I'm doing, I have a shower timer in my shower. The city water department gives out free shower timers. That's not the one pictured here, but I have a shower bucket, so I catch water from my shower. I use that to water my plants. My home didn't come with a dishwasher, but I had that countertop dishwasher from when I was a renter because you can attach it to your sink, and it was an Energy Star dishwasher. But it occurred to me that if I was using a shower bucket, I could use a dishwasher bucket. I was already using biodegradable dishwasher packets, so now all the water that drains out of my dishwasher I also use for plants. Because I am now a homeowner, I have a high-efficiency dual flush toilet, but all my windows have blackout curtains as well as blinds, so I'm greatly reducing the heat coming in. I have rain barrels on the back of my garage because it was the only space I could put enough rain barrels. These are 65-gallon rain barrels. It takes 5 60-gallon rain barrels to capture 1 inch of rainwater from a 20 by 20 foot garage. So that gives you an idea of how many rain barrels you need to capture all of the rain that hits your rooftop. But with our past rains, these filled up in the first 30 minutes of our first rainstorm, and I haven't had a chance to drain them because it's been raining so much. So I'd really like a cistern with all the water we've been losing. The city's got a number of things for air quality. We are transitioning, the city's transitioning their buses to electric buses. The port is working on expanding greener fleets throughout Long Beach for heavy trucks. The city has a great bike share program. We're instituting scooters. We've got bike lanes going in throughout. The city has a green fleet so that city-owned vehicles are either clean natural gas powered or they're moving towards having more electric or plug-in hybrids. So the city's doing a lot on that front. Things that you can do, whether you're a renter or a homeowner, you can work to clean your internal air. There are all kinds of plants that filter air quality inside your home. It also increases your mental health by being surrounded by vegetation. So you can do this regardless of whether or not you're a renter. This was when I was a renter. I haven't redone my garden now that I'm a homeowner because I have a puppy that destroys plants. But as a renter, I had a container garden because I could move that anywhere I needed to without getting in trouble from landlords. And this was all produce that I was growing on site. And I irrigated it. They make these, I pictured it down here, these terracotta cones. And I would just use empty wine bottles, fill them with water, dump them in the terracotta cones, and it would water my plants as needed. And I was growing my own vegetation. That lowers your carbon footprint. It's local produce right there. Sea level rise, coastal flooding actions. The city's doing quite a bit. Everything from beach nourishment, protective sandburns. We've got Alert Long Beach for emergencies. During El Nino, they did a big sandbag program. But something that we can also do as residents is if we know rain is coming, going out in your neighborhood and looking for storm drains and just taking it upon yourself to make sure they're clean of debris is the difference between a flooded street and a non-flooded street. In New Orleans, they now have a program where people can sign up to adopt a storm drain leading up to hurricanes to make sure that that storm drain is clear to reduce urban flooding. So we can do that regardless of having a program. You can just take it upon yourself from where you live. But the takeaway for me is really about it's up to us. So there's quite a bit our city is doing, quite a bit governments are doing, but it's all about everybody in this room coming together and saying, it's not the hand I've been dealt. This is the city I want to live in. This is how I want it to be. I want to be able to breathe the air outside. I want it to be cool so that I can take public transit and be able to walk to the bus without sweating beforehand. And that takes communities coming together and saying, we're engaged in the process and we're going to take ownership in what we want our city to look like. So that's really exciting to me because that's not waiting for somebody else to do something. That's about us getting to know our neighbors and talking about positive messages. What do we want our world to look like? And let's make that happen. Because we're already experiencing the impacts, but we don't have to be. If we're experiencing the impacts, we can be instigating the solutions ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Jake Heflin. Where are you? He's going down. Okay. These are going to be solutions for older adults. Jake.
Solutions for older adults. All right. Well, first of all, was that awesome to hear all the stuff that Jenny's been doing at her house? That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it started as a renter, and I mean that's pretty exciting. And it gets down to small things making a big difference. And I think you take her example and you multiply it by a factor of 10, or 15 or 20. It's just in this room, and you can start to see that organic effort, that groundswell that really starts taking hold around the community. And I think that's really the whole point for these conversations that we're having today is things that you can do individually to make a significant difference. Now, from my perspective at the fire department, I've been with the city now for just under 20 years here, and I've been a paramedic since 1994. So I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen a lot of different dynamics relating to how we see an increase or an uptake in the number of requests for services during high heat related events. And part of that reason is because I don't think we are prepared individually to handle some of those dynamics. And especially when we start talking about our elderly population and even our youth-based population. And I will throw another dimension on there, but our homeless population as well. And I think that's another dynamic that I think often is sometimes overlooked with regard to their vulnerabilities with exposure-related illnesses and injuries. And so when we start looking at some of those dynamics, there are things that we can do to make a significant difference. But it also starts to get down to understanding who's at risk and understanding the processes to support when a medical emergency occurs and things that you can do to make a difference. So one thing that the health department does, and they go out and they talk about these heat warnings. We do a lot of public messaging relating to things and proactive measures or preventative measures that you can take specifically to handle some of those things. But one of the primary mechanisms to support yourselves and your family is to get in a cool environment. And really, primarily, that's going to be minimizing your exposure to the high heat points of the day, right? So if you are working outdoors and you're working at 12 noon or between that, I'd say that 12 o'clock to about that 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's where we start to see the high heat dynamics. Well, you don't want to, we encourage you, if you're going to go out and do outside work, do the work in the morning or do the work in the late afternoon, right? Where you start to look at lower temperatures. In addition to that, try to take opportunities to go out to these cooling centers. The city puts up these cooling centers at libraries. They put up cooling centers at recreation, community rooms. Get into those areas to make sure you're putting yourself in an air-conditioned environment, because the air conditioning will also minimize risk or exposure. Now, depending upon the scenario, we will work with our partners, just like we did in the power outage. We made a call out to Long Beach Transit to identify that we needed wheelchair vans to support those with limited mobility or access or functional needs. And so we were able to activate resources to provide those services should we need to move and relocate people that have issues relating to getting up and down stairs or getting up and down elevators, specifically if we lose power, right? We weren't able to get them up and down elevators anymore. So we had to find a mechanism to put in place, and the city activated a shelter at Cesar Chavez Park to support those that could not get back to their rooms or was not able to take care of themselves during that event. So those are some of the things that we can do. Now, one of the other things that I will talk about is what happens if you do have that high heat-related emergency or you notice somebody's having a heat-related emergency. How would you identify that? Anybody have any ideas? What would you be looking for what we call maybe a clinical presentation, or what would you be looking for with regard to an individual that might be experiencing those types of injuries or conditions? Yeah? Dehydration. How do we know that we're dehydrated?
You're lightheaded.
Lightheaded, okay. What else? Dizzy? Okay, good. Yeah, hot to touch? Well, yeah, so here's an interesting thing. As a paramedic, right, I talked about paramedic levels assessment. Now, I'm going to tell you right back down to the basics, and this is going to be a little gross, but check your pee, right? If your pee is bright yellow, you're dehydrated. Your pee should be clear, right? And that's the goal. If you're actually going to the bathroom, and it sounds He's talking about urine, right? But these are things that are important. We actually literally, I say this jokingly, but it's that serious. In the urinals at the fire department, we actually have a P chart. And it's got different levels of color of urine. And the goal is if you're dehydrated and you're in that yellow phase, you should be drinking more water. Because the end goal is to be clear as far as your urine goes. That is an indicator of dehydration. More fluids. You need to drink fluids. Now we also look as an assessment tool. I'll look at what we call mucous membranes or dry mucous membranes. So if you were to take a look at inside of your lip or your mouth, right, or you would see dryness in your mouth, that can also be an indicator of dehydration or the early stages of dehydration. We talk about the headache, the nausea, the vomiting, the respiratory, those are more later signs associated with dehydration. So there are things that you can do on top of that to get in front of it. And that's where I talk about drinking fluids. Now, you want to avoid fluids that are high in caffeine. Right? Fluids that are high in caffeine will also prompt and encourage dehydration. Right? So we want to be cognizant of that as well. So there are things as it relates to other presentations, right? Slowness, lethargy, even in some points combativeness, right? Those can be also indicators of potential issues relating not only from dehydration, but transitioning to heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. The one big dynamic that I'm going to tell you about heat exhaustion versus heat stroke is the presentation of what we call your skin signs. When you're still sweating, that's good, right? Because your body, why do we sweat?
Release heat.
Right? It's your body's temperature control mechanism, right? It's basically how we control our temperature, right? Now, but the problem is when we get transitioned to heat stroke, our ability to manage our temperature control mechanism is basically shuts off. And we have rapid increases in the core temperature of our bodies, which translates to that hot, red, dry skin. And in addition, you're going to see the clinical manifestation present with changes in mental status, changes in behavior, right? Altered level of consciousness, right? When we start to see those things, we've transitioned from a medical emergency to a critical life-threatening issue. Heat stroke is that critical life-threatening event that we need to get people to the hospital. But things that we can do immediately is to put them in a cool environment and cool them down quickly. All right, now how do we do that? How do we do that here without me showing up and saying, I'm here to help, right? How do we do that? Ice packs. We put ice packs in their armpits, put ice packs in their groin, put ice packs in the back of their neck. These are what we call cooling measures. We got to drop that core temperature down. We got to get them cool. We want to be cautious to not cool them too quickly because we don't want to induce what? Shivering. Why would we not want to do shivering? Why do we shiver? To warm us back up, right? So it's our body's ability to try to warm us back up. So we want to be cognizant that we want to continue the cooling measures, but we also want to do it in a manner that doesn't promote shivering. So we want to there's that fine balance there. But the first step in the process is to what? Recognize that the issue's happening. And that we take steps immediately to change that and transition that and be cognizant of it and get them the medical help that they need. And that's where you call me. But understand this, that we talk about elderly population being vulnerable to that, and there were some great discussions that happened a little earlier when we talked about even people that are experiencing chronic medical conditions. Alzheimer's, right? Things that because they don't remember how they've taken care of themselves, or they have challenges taking care of themselves because they might be limited mobility or on their own and have other medical extenuating circumstances that don't allow for that. And then we get into the social dynamic as well, the financial dynamic on top of that, right? I don't have the money, I don't want to turn my air conditioning on, or I don't have air conditioning. And so that's what we tell people. And I'm telling you right now, I have walked into homes during these heat waves on a medical call, and those homes are cranking hot. And you sit there and go, this is unacceptable. But who becomes the advocates for them? Neighbors. Right? And that's what I'm telling you. It starts organically. We have to take care of each other. So if you know that you have neighbors that are elderly or that are at risk or vulnerable populations, right? Those are where you need to have the conversation. Say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to take you over to the mall for the day. Let's go out and just walk around the mall. Or let's just go, we got a nice little cooling shelter over here. Let's go get some cards and let's play some cards, right? at the cooling shelter. But we don't have to put ourselves in those positions. But we find ourselves just, that's just the way it is. I'm just going to sit here and just try to get through it. But I want to encourage you, there's no need to do that. We're putting those things in place to provide protective mechanisms to take care of our community. But it's up to you to be responsive to that. It's up to you to take those steps to follow suit and to make sure you're taking care of yourself and your family. So, in addition to that, I think it's about having a plan. So understand how you're going to get around, right? Identify the resources that we bring to bear to support some of those needs, right? Reaching out to family or friends to help support you, right? Those are things as part of that plan. Making sure that you have enough water, making sure that you know how to hydrate yourself, making sure that you have enough medication. So if you do need to go somewhere, this gets back to having that go bag. If you need to go somewhere, right, you have the medications that you need to take with you in case you need to be there for 6 or 12 hours. Right? So you don't go, oh, I forgot my medication that I need to take every 12 hours. Right? These are those types of things that we want to be cognizant of as well. And I'm going to also tell, on top of this, learn basic first aid and CPR. Because these are important issues as well. Now, I'm going to also tell you about an app that we have in Long Beach. I hope that you all have Go Long Beach, right? I hope you do. But in addition to that, we have an app called Pulse Point. PULSEPOINT. Pulse Point Respond. Now, this is kind of a cool app because it allows us to also communicate with you directly from the fire department. And it will tell you every single emergency incident that's happening in the city of Long Beach. And on top of that, as it relates to emergency incidents, right? On top of that, it will also walk you through hands-only CPR. And are you ready for this? On even better, right? If you know CPR and somebody is in need of CPR, Pulse Point will use your location on your phone and send you an alert. And if you're within a quarter-mile radius of somebody experiencing sudden cardiac arrest, your phone will activate and say CPR is needed to allow you to go start CPR before I even get there. And there have been multiple occasions where Pulse Point has saved lives utilizing technology. Because people just like you, our citizen superheroes, stepped in and made a difference when seconds counted. So these are those types of things that are out there, and this is where your city is embracing technology to make a significant difference. But it's only as good as those that use it. And that's why I'm here to talk to you about these resources that we bring to bear, not only from the fire department, but from the police department, from the health department, from the city as a whole. Because collectively, we're committed to taking care of you. But you have to do your part as well. And you have to help us get to that point where we can spread the word. Because you're going to hear the message today, but all these seats should be full. But you have to go out and be the advocate with that message. You have to go tell your neighbor, and then they tell their neighbor. And then eventually, I got a waiting list for 2 years for people that want to get in a cert. Right? That's the goal. Because the more we become educated, the more we become informed, the more resilient we become. The more actions that we can take. Dr. Lentz was talking about, right? The more prepared and resilient we become as a community. But we all have individual ownership. And that's where it's not about what's the city doing for me, it's what am I doing to support my city? What am I doing to be a part of the solution and not the problem? That's resiliency. That's how we come together, and that's why we're talking about this climate adaptation and action plan. Because collectively, we're stronger. There's a lot of great resources out there, folks. Look at all these tables. Look at all these passionate people behind me. This is pretty incredible that we've come together to have these conversations and discussions today. And our friends at Long Beach TV, they're going to push this information out far and wide as well. But it's about being the spokesperson for our communities. It's about being that advocate, being that neighbor that says, hey, we can do this together. There are things we can do to make a difference. Passing this information out. Grab a couple of them and take those information and pass them out to your neighbors because they couldn't be here today. But you have to be the advocates. Because that's what makes Long Beach ready, more prepared, and more resilient. Thank you very much.